We're starting our unit now on ancient Greece. This is the first section, and this is about how Greece got started, the geography, and the way the government was organized. First, we're going to introduce the creation myth. This is the Greek myth that explains how the planet Earth and the world began. So, first there was Mother Earth. Next, the gods of night and day appeared, and then starry sky. Earth and sky created the 12 titans. These gods rebelled against their father Sky. The son of Kronos, Zeus, toppled Kronos from his throne, and he became head of all the gods. Okay, we're going to look at Greece's geographic setting. As you can see from this picture, you see mountains surrounded by water. Greece is a peninsula. It's surrounded by water on 3 sides, and it has clusters of islands. Mountains are the major landform. Therefore, farmland is scarce, not too much farmland. The Greeks then became traders and sailors. The geography of Greece made it very difficult for people to get together because they were isolated by either the water on an island or by the mountains. So this forced Greek communities to think of themselves as separate little countries. And each one of these communities thought of themselves as having their own independence with their own governments and their own customs. And each area was ready to go to war to protect their identity. Each one fought with each other even though they shared a common language, heritage, and religion. I want you to look at this map and see, all right, by the orange on the map as I go around with the mouse, you can see the parts of Greece, very different from the previous civilizations we've studied. Greece is an island nation with a peninsula. Okay? Now, in the beginning, the Greeks shared stories about how they began as a civilization. Greek myths told stories about features of nature. But the most important story was about the Trojan War, a war between Greece and Troy across the sea. And you can see that in this picture. Here is Athens, and here is Troy across the Aegean Sea. Well, the Trojan War is a mythical story of great heroes in Greece. And the story goes that there was a prince named Paris from Troy who was a guest of the Greek king Menelaus. Paris kidnapped Menelaus's wife Helen and took her to Troy. A war began against Greece and Troy and lasted for 10 years. The Greeks used a trick to conquer Troy and burned and looted the city. And you can see here on the right is the Trojan horse, where it was supposed to be a gift, but inside the horse was a huge army that eventually burned the city of Troy down. Now, this war, the Trojan War, inspired Homer, here's a sculpture of Homer, to write 2 epic poems. One is called the Iliad, and then the other, the Odyssey. The Iliad tells of a quarrel between the Greek leaders in the last year of the war, and the Odyssey describes the adventures of the hero Odysseus as he struggles to return to his homeland from Troy. Well, soon after the Trojan War ended, there was a collapse in the Greek civilization. No one knows why. Could be climate, could be a lot of natural factors. But poverty was everywhere, and people no longer traded for food and goods beyond Greece. So they had to depend on what they grew themselves, and some people were forced to flee to islands to the west. The art of writing disappeared. So from 1100s BC to 750 BC, this is the period of time called the Dark Ages. So without writing, people depended on word of mouth to pass on their traditions, which is what created the myths that were told and retold. Families began to settle in places where they could grow crops and raise animals. These family farms grew into small villages. They developed around places with rocky, protected hills where they could be safe from attack. The name of such a place was Acropolis, meaning high city. And as you can see down here on the lower right, you'll see the picture of the Acropolis, which still exists in Greece today. So around 750 BC, villages joined together to form a city near the Acropolis. These cities had their own government and traditions, and they were called city-states. Hundreds of city-states grew up, each independent from one another. And you can see on this map on the left all the different city-states all along the islands and the peninsula of Greece. Okay, now we look at the government and figure out how Greece began. In the beginning, the earliest leaders of these city-states were the kings or military leaders. They were called aristocrats. Aristocrats is a term, and it means rich and powerful. They took controlled all the good land in Greece, and they had the best chariots and weapons. So as the Greeks grew rich from trade, a new middle class of merchants and artisans emerged who wanted a say in the government. These wealthy businessmen waged war against the nobles, and they took power. These rulers were called tyrants because they seized power by force. And tyrants were supported by the middle and working classes and were very respected, and in the beginning they ruled very wisely. Eventually, though, the people of many city-states overthrew the tyrants. A few villages formed a government called a democracy, where the citizens governed themselves. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Athens was the city-state where democracy was fully expressed. As you can see in this picture on the lower right, this is called the Senate, which we will learn about later. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, Solon, an Athenian leader, reformed the laws by canceling all debts, freeing citizens who had been enslaved for having debts, and allowing males over 18 to debate the laws. This was the beginning of the democratic process. Okay, key ideas to remember. The geography of Greece is very important. Mainland Greece is a peninsula. Mountains is the major landform, which is why farmland is scarce. Because of having over 2,000 islands, Greek communities thought of themselves as separate countries, although they shared a common language, culture, and religion. Okay, what happened to Greece during the Dark Ages? Poverty spread throughout Greece. Writing disappeared. Families resettled where they could farm, protected by hills, called the Acropolis. By 750 BC, villages joined together to form city-states. What type of government existed in the newly created city-states? First, the aristocrats took over, followed by the tyrants or middle class, and finally, democracy, government by the citizens.